Today's flipped lesson is for lesson 3B, subtracting decimals or subtracting rational numbers. We're going to be utilizing the same strategies that we did earlier in the year with integers. So a little background knowledge. Remember, when we're adding rational numbers, we want to compare them by determining whether we have more positives or more negatives. In this problem, we have 15.7 positives, and we know we have more positives and 9.2 negatives. We have more positives, so therefore the sum is positive, and we have 6.5 more. So the sum is 6.5 or 6 5/10. In this background knowledge problem, we have more negatives. In fact, we have 30.4 negatives and 0 positives. Therefore, since we have more negatives, the sum is negative, and we have 30.4 more negatives. That's negative 30 4/10. And then our last background knowledge problem, in this problem we have more negatives. We have 3.5 negatives, in fact, 3.3 positives. We have negative 0.2 or negative 2/10. In the past, anytime we had a subtraction problem with integers, we would always make sure that we turned the problem into an addition problem, which is sometimes referred to as adding the opposite. And we're going to do the same thing with rational numbers. So the first thing we want to do is add the opposite. Change this to an addition problem. So every single one of these, I want you to rewrite it as an addition problem, much like we are forced to do when we use the software for subtracting integers. And at this point, it's much like all the other problems that we have worked on. So we take a look at whether we have more positives or more negatives. We have more negatives, so let's gather up our negatives. We have 21.1 negatives and 0 positives. Since we have more negatives, the sum is negative. And in fact, we have 21.1 or 21 1/10 more negatives than we do positives. So make sure in all these problems, if it is a subtraction problem, you turn it into an addition problem by adding the opposite and then find the sum that you have. All right, pause this flipped lesson and try number 2. First thing we need to do is to turn this into an addition problem by adding the opposite. So this is going to turn into negative 2.2 plus positive 24.5. So let's rewrite that. In the sum problem that I have now, I have more positives than I do negatives. So let's write down the one that we have more of first. 24.5 positives and only 2.2 negatives. We have more positives, therefore the sum is going to be a positive answer, and we have 22.3 more positives. So the sum is, or in this case the original problem was difference, so the difference is positive 22.3. Pause this flipped lesson and try number 3. In number 3, we need to turn it into an addition problem, so it turns into 14.5 plus negative 15.9, and we're rewriting it. We have more negatives than we do positives, so we write it down first. We have 15.9 negatives, 14.5 positives. Since we have more negatives, the sum is negative, or the difference is negative. And in fact, we have 1.4 more negatives, so the difference is negative 1.4 or negative 1 4/10. Pause the flipped lesson and try number 4. All right, turning this into an addition problem, it turns into 22.6 plus negative 7.8. That's by adding the opposite. We have more positives, so we have 22.6 positives and 7.8 negatives. Since we have more positives, the sum or difference is positive. And in fact, we have 14.8 more positives than negatives. So the difference is 14.8 or 14 8/10. Pause this flipped lesson and try number 5. All right, number 5, turning this into an addition problem, it should look like this. Negative 17.9 plus negative 16.8. We have more negatives than we do positives. So we'll have to gather up all of our negatives in this one. We have 34.7 negatives, and that leaves us with 0 positives. So the sum or difference is negative 34 7/10, or negative 34.7. Pause the flipped lesson and try number 6. Number 6, as an addition problem, this turns into 9.5 plus positive 3.8 after we added the opposite. We have more positives than we do negatives. We will have to gather all of our positives together. We have 13.3 positives, and that leaves us with 0 negatives. So our sum or difference, remember it was originally a difference problem and we turned it into a sum problem. But either way is 13 3/10 or 13.3. Pause this flipped lesson and try number 7. Number 7 turns into 4.9 plus negative 14.6 after we add the opposite. So that's what it is as an addition problem. In this problem, we have more negatives than we do positives. In fact, we have 14.6 negatives and only 4.9 positives. Since we have more negatives, the sum or difference is negative. And in fact, we have 9.7 more negatives than positives. So the sum or difference is negative 9.7 or negative 9 7/10. Every single one of these problems I've written how about with a number line. We will talk about that in class. And that is it for today's flipped lesson.